Here in the capital city, Topeka, Kansas. This may be my first year serving this historic synagogue community, but I've already come to appreciate so much about Kansas, and I'm sure that attachment will only grow. Along with my co-chairs of the Kansas Holocaust Commission, Alan Parker, Jessica Rockhold, and Jane Green, it's my honor to welcome you all to this year's Holocaust Commemoration, the 40th in the state of Kansas. I'd especially like to thank the other members of the commission, whose names can be found in your program, and our many Kansas clergy, legislators, and judges, including my own congregant Judge Rosen, for their participation in today's commemoration. And I would like to thank Governor Laura Kelly for your longtime support and your participation in the Holocaust commemoration. The Holocaust stands out in the evils committed by humanity. The Nazis, for the first time in human history, tried to genocide, eradicate an entire people, the Jewish people, out of existence. They also killed millions of other people, including Roma, Sinti, LGBTQ people, those with physical or mental disabilities, and anyone who dissented against their tyranny. Our memory of the Holocaust, the Shoah, reminds us where hatred and incivility lead. Our gathering today is to remember those who suffered and perished, whose lives were stolen, but also to educate the next generation about the Holocaust, so they will know that together we will always resist bigotry and tyranny. As we turn our attention to today's proclamation, I'd like to thank Governor Laura Kelly once again for joining us. Governor Kelly grew up in a military family, and she credits that upbringing for teaching her the values of service, integrity, and accountability, characteristics that continue to inform how she leads our state. She's known for her commitment to working across the aisle to get things done for our communities, families, and businesses. As I mentioned before, Governor Kelly has been a stalwart supporter of this commemoration, first as a state senator and then as governor since 2019. Please help me welcome Governor Laura Kelly.
I'm going to put this right up here and want to thank Jane Green for giving that to me at one of the other commemorations that we've done. It's been a long time been doing this. So thank you, Rabbi. Appreciate it. It really is good to gather again in person, especially for this particularly important tradition. The United States officially commemorates the Holocaust during the Days of Remembrance, and this year, U.S. Remembrance Day is today, April 28th. In Kansas, we have a long history of commemorating this ceremony. In 1982, Governor John Carlin signed the Proclamation for Days of Remembrance, at which time the Kansas State Holocaust Commission was formed. The commission's purpose was, and still is, to teach the history of the Holocaust, applying its lessons to counter indifference, intolerance, and genocide. Since its inception, every sitting governor of Kansas has attended or been represented in every annual State of Kansas Holocaust commemoration, and I'm honored to continue this tradition today. We recognize the Days of Remembrance every year in Kansas to remember and honor those who were killed during the Holocaust, including 6 million Jews and some 11 million more, including people with disabilities, Poles, Jehovah's Witnesses, members of the LGBTQ community. We do it to reassure the survivors and the descendants of the deceased that they and their loved ones are not forgotten, and to reflect on lessons learned, and to renew our commitment to stand up against bigotry, injustice, and hate. This ceremony not only obligates us to memorialize those who were killed during the Holocaust, but it also reminds us of the fragility of democracy and the need for Kansans to be vigilant in protecting democratic ideals. Although we've made a lot of progress, we still have a lot of work to do to fix the issues that divide us. Unfortunately, the past couple of years has magnified this need. The Anti-Defamation League's most recent audit of anti-Semitic incidents in the United States recorded more than 2,100 acts of assault, vandalism, and harassment, an increase of 12% over the previous year. This is the highest level of anti-Semitic incidents since the Defamation League began tracking in 1979. Without a doubt, our fight against hatred and discrimination is more important than ever. As governor, I have made it clear that there is no place for hate in our great state. That's why today's proclamation is not just a gesture, it is a call for action, a plea for all Kansans to promote acceptance, inclusion, and respect for one another. Before I sign the proclamation, I want to recognize the Kansas Holocaust Commission for its work educating Kansans about the Holocaust and urging all people to overcome prejudice and bigotry. Thanks to all of you who are here today. Kansas is made stronger when it embraces diversity, celebrates differences, and recognizes unique contributions. And with that, let me read the proclamation and then I'll go sign it. To the people of Kansas, greetings. Whereas the Holocaust, the state-sponsored systematic persecution and annihilation of European Jewry by Nazi Germany and its collaborators between 1933 and 1945, 6 million Jews were murdered, Roma and Sinti, people with disabilities, and Poles were also targeted for destruction or decimation for racial, ethnic, or national reasons. And millions more, including LGBTQ victims, Jehovah's Witnesses, Soviet prisoners of war, and political dissenters, also suffered grievous oppression and death under Nazi tyranny. And whereas the history of the Holocaust offers an opportunity to reflect on the moral and ethical responsibility of individuals, societies, and governments. Whereas the people of the state of Kansas should always remember the terrible events of the Holocaust and remain vigilant against hate, persecution, and tyranny. And whereas we, the people of the state of Kansas, should actively rededicate ourselves to the principles of individual freedom in a just society. And whereas the days of remembrance have been set aside for the people of the state of Kansas to remember the victims of the Holocaust, as well as to reflect on the need for respect for all peoples. Whereas, pursuant to an act of Congress, Public Law 96-388, October 7th, 1980, and the United States Holocaust Memorial Council designates the days of remembrance of the victims of the Holocaust to be Sunday, April 24th through Sunday, May 1st, 2022, including the Day of Remembrance known as Yom HaShoah, April 28th, 2022. Now, therefore, I, Laura Kelly, Governor of the state of Kansas, do hereby proclaim the week of April 24th through May 1st, 2022 as Days of Remembrance. In memory of the victims of the Holocaust and in honor of the survivors as well as the rescuers and liberators, and further proclaim that we, as citizens of the state of Kansas, should work to promote human dignity and confront hate whenever and wherever it occurs.
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Rockhold, and I am the Executive Director of the Midwest Center for Holocaust Education and a co-chair of the Kansas Holocaust Commission. Today, we remember those lost in the Holocaust, Those 6 million Jews who represented entire generations, murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators in a quest for what they termed the final solution to the Jewish problem. We remember the destroyed culture of European Jewry, a vibrant and diverse society thinking and determining their path forward in changing times, a process that was cut short by the Holocaust and never fully realized. Today, we also honor the survivors, those who found themselves as the last surviving remnant of their families and their communities. We pay tribute to their resilience and their fortitude. They moved forward from profound loss to rebuild their lives and reconstitute their families as refugees in a new country. We are grateful for the legacy that they have provided to us, sharing their testimony for future generations, ensuring that Holocaust education is prioritized, institutionalizing remembrance in the form of commemorative ceremonies like our gathering today, and their greatest legacy, their children and their grandchildren. The survivors' collective wish that their experiences be remembered, but also serve as a warning and a call to action in our world today resonates profoundly in our own time.
My name is Tobias Schlingensiepen, and I was born in West Berlin in 1963. My children's maternal family lost numerous family members in the Holocaust. My grandfather was a confessing church pastor who had to sign a document that said that when the Endsieg was realized, the final victory, he would have to report to Dachau, quote unquote, for liquidation. And I spent my summers with my grandfather, and that would not have been possible without those men and women who liberated the camps and who prevented the Endsieg from happening. I'm very humbled to be with you here today. At this time, we pay tribute to our nation's veterans. We honor those whose service to our country, especially in times of war, is nearly impossible to appreciate adequately, especially by those of us who have never had to witness and confront the horrors many of them have witnessed and confronted on our behalf. How many veterans live with experiences too horrible to forget and therefore impossible to convey to those who were not there? Merely saying thank you is not enough. During this time each year, we invite veterans of our armed forces to stand so that we may publicly acknowledge and honor them. Please. To those veterans who are present in this space with us today, as well as to those who are watching, and to their families, let me express this wish: that the rest of us, your fellow citizens, may live lives that prove worthy of the sacrifices you have borne and bear on our behalf. Zachor in Hebrew means remember. If we are to live into the peace we hopefully all seek, we must never forget the injustices of the past, and we must all vow to do much, much better. Thank you.
Well, next in the program is the President of the United States. I'm obviously not President Biden. But before I begin my reading, I would like to offer this thought. My good friend, Barry Crawford, passed away this past month or within the last six weeks. And we were very close, and I knew him very well, and he was an original member of the Holocaust Commission and great contributor, and he'll be greatly missed. And what is so touching is that his wife, Christy, who is also a very good friend, has agreed to be a part of this ceremony. And welcome, Christy. Never shall I forget. Never shall I forget that night, the first night in camp that turned my life into one long night, 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget that smoke. Never shall I forget the small faces of the children whose bodies I saw transformed into smoke under a silent sky. Never shall I forget the flames that consumed my faith forever. Never shall I forget the nocturnal silence that deprived me for all eternity of the desire to live. Never shall I forget those moments that murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams to ashes. Never shall I forget those things, even were I condemned to live as long as God himself. Never.
I am Rabbi Larry Carroll. I was rabbi of Temple Beth Shalom here from 1984 to 2006, and a member of the Holocaust Commission appointed by Governor Hayden in 1987, and on the commission from then until 2006, and served as chairperson of the commission from 1995 to 2006. My wife Rhonda and I just moved back to Overland Park, or moved to Overland Park last June, and it's really an honor to be here, and I guess I have to say to be back. Probably haven't been in the Capitol for 16 years. I'll be singing something that probably was sung in past years at some point. Yesh Kochavim is a melody created by Cantor Jeff Klepper to the words of Chana Sanesh, a poet whose words Eli Eli you'll hear a little bit later. Chana Sanesh is an example of action, having gotten out of Hungary to go to Palestine at the time, and she wrote her poetry there. And this is one of my favorites. There are stars, Yesh Kochavim. She went back to Europe as a paratrooper to try to save her mother and others in Europe, and was caught by the Nazis and was executed along with other people on her team at the age of 23. And I see her heroism as something that is a great example of action for many of us, but also the fact that her words have lasted until now and will last much longer. It's really a wonderful gift for us to have, so we will continue. There are stars up above, so far away we only see their light long, long after the star itself is gone. And so it is with people that we loved. Their memories keep shining ever brightly, though their time with us is done. But the stars that light up the darkest night, these are the lights that guide us as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember. Yesh kochavim shel ram magia artsa, rak asher himatzmam avdu ve'enam. Yesh anashim sheziv zichram meir כאשר הם עצמם אינם עוד בתוכנו. אורות אלה המבהיקים בחשכת הליל, הם שמראים לאדם את הדרך, את הדרך. הם שמראים לאדם את הדרך, את הדרך. As we live our days, these are the ways we remember. We remember. Hem shemarim ladam et haderech, et haderech, et haderech, et haderech.
I'm Rabbi Andrew Pepperstone, the rabbi of Ahavat Achim congregation in Wichita, Kansas, and it is an honor to be here with all of you gathered for this commemoration. The Creed of a Holocaust Survivor by Alexander Kimmel. I do believe with all my heart in the natural goodness of man. Despite the blood and destruction brought by one man trying to be God, in the goodness of man, I do believe. I do believe with all my heart that God gave man the blessing and the curse. Man can select the curse of envy, hatred, and prejudices, or the blessing of love, harmony, and beauty. Despite the painful curses of the past, in the blessing of the Creator, I do believe. I do believe with all my heart that God created a beautiful world, the sun and the trees, the flowers and the bees. And the best way to serve God is to enjoy the fruits of his labor of love. Despite the painful memories from the past, in the joyful celebration of life, I do believe. I do believe with all my heart that God has created man in image of his own, and killing of man is like killing of God. Despite the massacres in Rwanda, the cleansing in Bosnia, the folly of Muslim fanatics, and the cruelty of Pol Pot, in the love and compassion of the Creator, I do believe. I believe with all my heart that the Messiah and the kingdom of heaven will come, when man will conquer his destructive urge and learn how to live in harmony with nature and himself. When all the preachers of hate will be silenced, and man will become his brother's keeper. When man will stop killing man in the name of God, and nation will not lift weapons against nation. When it will be, I do not know, but despite all the signs to the contrary, in the dawn of a better world, I do believe.
Good afternoon. My name is Jane Green from Temple Beth Shalom here in Topeka. We are so fortunate to have Dr. Good with us today as our keynote speaker. And I'd like to take a moment to share how he got here. My husband Russ and Michael's older brother Lenny were friends at South Hills High School in West Covina, California. This past winter we got together with Lenny, and Russ and Lenny had 50 years of catching up to do. Of course, they talked about their families, and eventually the conversation got around to how each set of parents wound up in West Covina. I was so moved by Lenny's story, Lenny's parents' story. After checking with my fellow commission members, I asked Lenny if he would please be our keynote. He said he was honored to be asked, but was not one to speak in big groups. You might ask my brother. Michael said yes. Little did we know what a treasure we had uncovered. Sadly, the majority of Holocaust survivors are no longer with us. The Kansas Holocaust Commission is grateful to Dr. Good, like other children and grandchildren of survivors who carry on the mission to help overcome prejudice and inhumanity through education about the Holocaust. And our mission is to bring these stories to you. Dr. Good lives in Durham, Connecticut, where he practices family medicine. He and his wife, Susan, have 2 children. Welcome, Dr. Good. We have a little gift of appreciation for you.
Very much. Well, good afternoon. It's really an honor to be able to travel here from my home in Durham, Connecticut, and come here to the state capital of this great state of Kansas that I have the pleasure to visit these few days. Now, we're here to commemorate the genocide that occurred in Nazi-occupied Europe more than 75 years ago, when German Nazis and their local collaborators murdered 6 million men, women, and children, and also 5 million others who they had labeled as undesirables, whether they be Jehovah's Witnesses or Poles, communists, homosexuals, anyone who resisted their rule. So as we stand here in the heartland of America, more than 3/4 of a century and thousands of miles away from those events, we might ask ourselves, what do these stories from the Holocaust have to do with us, ordinary Americans? But the fact of the matter is that the people who were caught up in that genocide were ordinary people just like us. And as we look around the world today, as Vladimir Putin and his armies kill tens of thousands of Ukrainian civilians, we realize that in a painful way that humanity has not fundamentally changed in 75 years. And if we look around ourselves here in America, we can see that just like in pre-war Germany, there are some Americans who carry the same hate and bigotry as the Nazis and spread the same lies, namely that the existence of people different than themselves is somehow a threat to ourselves and our families and our country. In August 2017, there was a gathering of white supremacists and neo-Nazis in Charlottesville, Virginia, and they held a parade carrying tiki torches as they declared and chanted, "Jews will not replace us." Many people did not understand the significance of the torchlight political parade, and in fact, President Trump at the time tried to reassure us that he was sure that there were fine people taking part in that march. But the Jews around the country understood exactly why those marchers were carrying torches. They were emulating the Nazi brown shirt torchlit parades that occurred in Germany during the 1930s, when Nazi brown shirts would march to a rally carrying torches and then go into town and smash Jewish shops and homes and beat up Jews and sometimes kill them. Those American white supremacists were sending us a message. They were telling us that they admired the Nazis and that those Nazi brown shirts, who were the same men who 10 years later would go on to murder millions of people, were people that they wanted to emulate. The marchers in Charlottesville were telling us that they too would like to kill black and brown and Jewish people. I can tell you, I heard that message loud and clear. But when I realized that many of my fellow Americans did not, I understood that it was important for me to come around the country and tell my parents' tales of survival during the Holocaust. Now, my parents, William and Pearl Good from West Covina, California, were originally Vovka Zev Gadud and Parela Esterovich from a place called Vilna, Poland, which today is known as Vilnius, Lithuania. My father was 17 years old when the Germans occupied the area in June of 1941. And about 2 weeks after they arrived, he was walking to get a haircut at his neighborhood barbershop, already wearing the armband that identified him as a Jew, when suddenly a German army jeep drove up alongside him and grabbed him and threw him inside. And there was a German officer who told him that they were gathering young men to clear rubble from the recent fighting. And so he was taken to a park, and there were about 500 other teenagers and young Jewish men who were there. And they were put on covered army trucks and told that they were going to the next town to clear rubble. And so they drove for about half an hour, and then the truck stopped, and the covers were thrown off the back, and they were suddenly confronted with a machine gun pointed right at them, manned by Lithuanian militiamen and supervised by one Nazi SS officer. And they were told that they couldn't talk, they couldn't move, or the machine gun would kill them all on the spot. They were not in the next town over to clear rubble. They had been brought to the Ponari forest, where huge pits had been excavated and were being used for the execution of Jews. My father could not believe what he was seeing. One by one, the young men were taken off the truck and walked to the edge of this huge pit and then shot in the back of the head and fell into the mass grave. My father, even as his executioner was leading him to the edge of the pit, could not believe that he was about to die. And then, as he approached the edge of the pit, and the executioner raised his gun to shoot, he tripped and stumbled and pitched forward and fell down just as the shot was fired at the back of his head, and he fell to the ground. And the executioner thought that he had been killed like all the others and went to get another victim, when in fact, my father was unharmed. The bullet had missed. And so, for the next 4 hours, he lay perfectly still, pretending to be dead, as truckload after truckload after truckload of young Jewish men and teenagers were brought and murdered. After those many hours, it finally became silent, and he finally pulled himself out from the other bodies and climbed out of the grave and found himself surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of dead young men. The area was surrounded by barbed wire, and he knew that there were guards at the entrance, and so he began to frantically dig with his hands under the barbed wire as quickly as he could before the executioners could return with another group of victims. And he managed to squeeze under the barbed wire, cutting himself badly, and then he ran and ran through the forest, crying hysterically, until he came to the hut of a simple Polish peasant family who were very kind to him. They helped calm him down. They helped him wash all the gore. They covered him off of him. They helped him clean his wounds from the barbed wire, and they gave him new clothing. And then he walked for 20 kilometers back to Vilna. Now, when he arrived back at his home and he told his family and his neighbors what had just happened to him, that the Germans were murdering young Jewish men in the forest of Panari, the neighbors didn't believe him. They thought he'd had some kind of psychotic break. I mean, who would believe a story like that if somebody came and told you that? But his parents did believe him. And therefore, my father, my grandfather Dov, his mother Hannah, and his younger brother, 13-year-old Model, fled Vilna and went about 20 miles away to the village of Nemenchin, where my father had actually grown up. And there for 2 months, they remained in relative safety. And all was quiet, like nothing had happened. But then, in September of 1941, on the night of September 20th, suddenly, in the middle of the night, one of their neighbors, a woman named Felicia Paskovsky, crept up to their window and whispered that the men of Nemenchin had been ordered to dig graves for the Jews of the village and that they were all to be shot in the morning. And this warning, which was taken at great risk, allowed them to go into prepared hiding places. My grandmother Hannah and young Model went into a hollowed-out chamber underneath a huge woodpile in the back of the property. My grandfather Dov and my father went and hid in the forest. The next morning, the Jews of Nemenchin were indeed gathered together, and 403 of them were shot and killed on the outskirts of town. Now, after 2 or 3 days, young Model became claustrophobic and stir-crazy, hiding in this little dark, horrible place, and he couldn't take it anymore, and he left the hiding place to stretch his legs. And he was soon denounced by a passing shepherd, and the Lithuanian police captured him and took him to the police station. When Model didn't return, Hannah left the hiding place to look for him and asked some neighbors if they knew what had become of him, and they told her that he had been captured and taken to the police station and that he was going to be shot in the morning. My grandmother Hannah could not bear the thought of her young boy being alone, surrounded by tormentors during the last night of his young life. And so she turned herself in so that they could spend their final hours together. They were both beaten and then shot the next morning. Now, my father and grandfather Dov hid in the forest for 3 long years of Nazi occupation. And they were only able to survive because of the bravery of some local neighbors who risked their lives to bring them food, to let them sleep in their barns when the temperatures got below zero. If any of them had been caught, not only would the Jews be shot, but all the family of the Gentiles who were assisting them, not just the adults, but also their children, they all would have been murdered, and this was something that happened with some frequency. So these were very, very brave people. My father was actually captured on 2 different occasions, but through a combination of bravery and luck, he managed to survive. He's a very resourceful guy, my dad. Now, my mother, Pearl, is also a Holocaust survivor from Vilna. Due to the time limitations of this talk, I can't really go in depth into her story, but I will say that she was aged 12 to 14 and spent 2 unhappy years trapped in the Vilna ghetto with thousands of other Jews, and then spent the last year of the war as a slave laborer in the HKP slave labor camp on the outskirts of Vilna. She survived the liquidation of the Vilna ghetto. She survived a Kinder action, an action against the children of the HKP camp, where the Nazi SS men came in and captured 213 children in the camp and murdered them. She also survived the final liquidation of the camp. And she and about 1,000 other Jews at that time, under the auspices of the HKP unit, were protected by a mysterious but somehow benevolent commander of the camp, a man named Major Plage, who my mother and the other survivors said, "Save them all." And I'll be telling a little bit more about the story of Major Plage and his unusual actions and a remarkable story tomorrow evening at Temple Beth Shalom here in Topeka. And of course, for other people who are interested in learning more about that remarkable story, I've written a book, The Search for Major Plage, the Nazi Who Saved Jews. Now, out of Vilna's 100,000 Jewish civilians who were alive in June of 1941, only 2,000 would survive the war. So my parents are among a teeny 2% of Jewish civilians who managed to survive that killing machine. So what are we to make, us Americans, 3/4 of a century later, from these terrible and difficult stories from the Holocaust? Well, first, that there are evil people in the world, and unfortunately, some of them are among us. The men who would shoot a 17-year-old in the back of the head, or kill my grandmother Hannah, or her young 13-year-old son, were not fine or decent people. And neither are the American white supremacists who admire and emulate the Nazis, who murder black worshipers in a church in Charlotte, North Carolina, or Jewish congregants at a synagogue in Pittsburgh. So the synagogue reminds us of the catastrophe that can happen when such racists and demagogues are allowed to grasp the reins of power and use the power of a state for their terrible agenda. But these stories also point us toward the other side of human nature, namely our unexpected ability to act with generosity and moral courage. Now, most of us feel that we're just small and ordinary people, not braver than average, and the events in the world that are going on around us are so much bigger than ourselves. But we look at the actions of some of these other small and ordinary people from my parents' stories, the peasants and neighbors who helped my father and grandfather Dov, the Gasparovich family, the Pashkovskis, the Kinsiewiczes, who risked their lives for 3 years to keep my father and grandfather alive, of Karl Plage, the commander of the HKP unit, who used his position to protect 1,000 Jews from the Nazi slaughter for 3 long years, first in the Vilna ghetto and then at the HKP camp. And so these stories help us realize that looking back at the Holocaust does not only remind us of what can occur if evil is not resisted, it also gives us hope that perhaps even ordinary people can make a difference. So after the war, Karl Plage, my mother's benefactor, wrote some letters. And in one of the letters, in corresponding with his former prisoners, he wrote, "I am no kind of hero. I'm actually a very nervous person." And I really think that we need to listen and think to that statement. I am no kind of hero. I'm actually a very nervous person, because it gives hope that ordinary people like us nervous, not braver than average, that perhaps we too can look around our circle of influence and see people in need, and that perhaps we too can change the world for the better. Now, I'd like to close with a quote from another letter that Karl Klage wrote about 10 years after the war. And he said, "Perhaps in other places, only a small amount of determination was lacking in order to prevent or decrease the atrocities. I never felt that this needed special courage. It required only the conviction and strength that can be found from the depth of moral feelings that exist in all human beings." Thank you very much.
I want to thank Dr. Good for an absolutely inspiring story that you shared. I'm going to remember it for a long time. I'm Rachel Black, and I am a cantorial student at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, and I am also a third-generation Holocaust survivor. In fact, my grandparents have very similar stories to your family as well, Dr. Good. My grandfather was a partisan, and my grandmother was also buried alive in a mass grave in Poland, surviving a gunshot wound to the leg. I'm going to share Eli Eli by Chana Senesh. Eli, Eli, Shelo yikamel leolam, hachol ve'ayam, rish My God, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart, the sand and the sea.
Good afternoon. I am Dr. Mary Greenberg with the Holocaust Commission. We begin the candle lighting with an introduction. We hear the numbers: over 6 million Jews killed, more than 1 million of them children. The enormity is overwhelming, but it is the small things rather than the big picture that the mind can grasp. Each was a person who loved and was loved. They were parents, children, co-workers, and friends. As we light these candles, we remember them for what they were and who they might have been.
David Altman, Dora Berkovitz, Rosa Cohn, Moishe Daum, Rachel Daum, Moishe Egelstein.
I'm Vicki Schmidt. We remember them as mothers who sought to nurture and protect their children, even at the cost of their own lives. We remember the mother who was taken from her children and died, never knowing their fate.
Favo Federmann, Rachela Greenbaum, Josef Gutowitz, Bertha Gutowitz, the Moses Hogwell family, the Esther Hogwell.
I'm Phyllis Lansford, and I am part of the Holocaust Commission. And also, I think what has really formed me who I am today, my mother was a survivor of the Holocaust. We remember them as fathers, once proud heads of households who worked to provide for their families. Remember the father who could not guide his children to adulthood, who tried but could not protect.
Bienvenida Hogwell, Rachel Heimovitz, Fania Katz, Shmuel Katz, Mendel Lesky, Beenam Lesky.
My name is Melissa Rooker. I'm the great-granddaughter of the Strauss and Borchovich families who fled Odessa ahead of the darkness. We remember them as grandparents, the Bubbies and Zadies, who did not end their lives with the dignity they had earned, who died not of old age, but age-old hatred.
The Joseph Levy family, Natan Levy, Raphael Levy, Solomon Levy, Ethel Levin, Jacob Lebowitz.
I am Pastor David Strumman with Redeemer Lutheran Church in Salina, and a descendant of a man with the occupation forces that guarded SS women after camps had been liberated. We remember them as friends and neighbors who enjoyed a meal together, passed the time together, and shared the everyday joys and sorrows of life before their world turned dark.
Pinkos Lipschick, Hannah Lipschick, Ruth Lindenbaum, Elke Lipa, Eleazar Lipa, Chaim Mandelbaum.
I'm Senator Brenda Dietrich, a retired educator. We remember them as teachers, doctors, builders, and artists whose talents to heal, create beauty, and lead were erased by those with no future vision other than to destroy. We remember and wonder what was lost to their world and to ours.
Bertha Nussbaum, Chaim Rosenbaum, Malka Segelstein, Nacha Tenenbaum, Chaya Unikowski, Aaron Unikowski.
My name is Christy Crawford, and I am here on behalf of my husband, Dr. Barry Crawford, who served on the Holocaust Commission for many years. We remember them as a link to our past and gateway to our future. Our heritage diminished by the loss of the young men and women who could not become parents, and by the loss of elders who could not pass their knowledge and wisdom to the next generation.
Adolf Wolf, Rosalia Wolf, Rivka Zelmanovich, Sally Zwim, Helga Zwim.
Peace on this distinguished audience. The final solution to the Jewish question targeted every man, woman, and child of the Jewish community for destruction. During the same period, and utilizing many of the mechanisms built to persecute and destroy the Jewish community, millions of non-Jews suffered and died as well. Some were targeted for racial reasons, primarily among the Roma and the Sinti, mentally and physically challenged Germans and Soviet POWs. Others were targeted for ideas considered hostile or non-favorable to the state, political opponents, members of the LGBTQ community, and Jehovah's Witnesses. We also honor the noble sacrifice of the righteous among the nations, members of the non-Jewish community who often, at great personal risk, chose to act on behalf of the persecuted people of Europe, often through selfless acts which provided shelter and refuge to Jewish neighbors. Today, we honor the memory of the millions of non-Jewish victims of the Holocaust.
Please rise if you're able.
Adonai hu
I'm Rabbi Michael Davis from Congregation Emmanuel in Wichita, and I have the honor of serving on the Holocaust Commission as well. Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, our God and God of all generations. At our Pesach Seder not too long ago, we remembered the Pharaoh who knew not Joseph, nor knew compassion nor humanity. We were reminded of his cruelty then, but we learned as well, Shelo echad bilvad amad aleinu lachalotenu. Not just one enemy has risen against us to destroy us, but in every generation they rise against us to destroy us. Today, on this sacred day, we remember. We remember with broken hearts those who suffered and perished in the Holocaust, stolen from their families, stolen from our people, stolen from this life. The millions upon millions, though each one unique, each individual loved by those dear to them, each beloved of God. We remember them and we mourn them. They were stolen from us. We praise you, O God, with love for those who journeyed through hell with your name on their lips. We praise you for their strength and faith, and for the love they showed one another. We praise you as well for the men and women of courage and kindness who attempted to aid the Jews, those who could not abide the cruelty expected of them, those who could not turn away and hide their eyes. Because of them, some survived, and some bore children who carry on their name and their faith. We pray, O God, that we, in our day, may not turn away. We pray for the strength and resolve to remember the lesson that Torah asserts over and over again. Because you were slaves in Egypt, you shall treat others with justice and love. Because you were slaves in Egypt, you will not oppress and wrong another. And because we fled from Nazi cruelty and horror, we will not stand idly by as others flee today. Though the world turned its back on us, we will not turn ours on them. On this day of remembrance, remember us. Grant us the courage to give courage to others, those who seek merely to live lives of peace. May we learn the lesson of Torah, of our history, and the lesson of those who stood tall against the horror perpetrated against us. Lo tuchal litalem. You must not remain indifferent to the plight of another. With this as inspiration, may we go forth from here and be among those who rescue. May we be among those who bring to our world justice, wholeness, and peace. Amen.
This concludes our program for this afternoon. Thank you all for joining us at this 40th commemoration of the Holocaust for the state of Kansas. Lech b'shalom, go in peace.